Hey there troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and recently we've seen some redesigns in Battlefield 5. For those of you who've noticed, Panzerstorm has actually had some tinkering done with it. The map has had more layers of cover added to it. It's also added some new ways for infantry to traverse a bit more safely, with the overall idea simply being to improve how Panzerstorm plays as a map for infantry players, and ultimately it was a fix that was pretty well received by the community. Now with that in mind, and with Tides of War really being an ongoing service for Battlefield, I was wondering what else in Battlefield we could look towards for redesigns. And today I think I'm going to dive into some of that, and I'm going to be looking at a few things, mostly modes, but also the odd map here and there that I feel deserves some love. So first and foremost for me, Breakthrough mode definitely needs some work in Battlefield 5. Now, I really like the concept of Breakthrough having, two teams that are very clearly split into one defensive and one offensive unit. And the idea around that is pretty great because it really does force players to be intelligent with how they play. They have to think about flanking routes, and one man or one tank can really make the difference. And I think a lot of people appreciate that about the game mode. But what I would like to see with Breakthrough is then tinker around with a slightly lower player count, and I think it's very evident in a lot of the game modes, especially on things like Hamada and maybe even things like Aras, where it's clear that 32 versus 32 just gets far too chaotic. The real reason people enjoy Breakthrough is because it's about that clutch moment where you wipe people off of the objective. And I feel the issue with having 32v32 is that there's just too much players, there's too much of an excess of people that can have an impact on an objective. And you see it quite frequently, sometimes it just feels like a never-ending charade of one team capturing an objective, but then, oh, they've captured B, now we're going to capture A, they've captured B, oh, we've captured B, they've captured A. And a lot of the time when this combat goes down, it's very messy, and the idea of sort of a defensive versus offensive unit almost falls apart, and I think you see that a lot on Hamada, especially in the earlier phases, where it almost just appears to be this large degree of chaos between the objectives, and it's not really something that I would advocate, and it's not really something that I enjoy. I think operations in Battlefield 1 as 40 players really showed that at a 64 player count it was simply too chaotic in some parts when you played on Grand Operations, but the smaller variants actually played pretty well. And I think it'd be interesting to see this tried out and see how the community receives it. Speaking of redesigns, I would really like to see Hamada get some love in general, mostly down to the fact that A, the Conquest Assault mode is simply a mess that nobody wants to play, and B, in my opinion, the map is just far too open. Hamada has a lot of potential in the sense that there could be some really great areas of cover and some really great areas of engagement, but a lot of it's just rubbly terrain that doesn't really offer you anything solid. And I'd actually like to see more buildings. I'd like to see more physical improvements, more sandbags, more locations that actually feature some kind of man-made structures. And the reason for that is simply because Hamada just blends into this drift of lots of people laying down and crouching on rocks. You don't really know where they are, it's quite difficult to see them, and in the end it just gets chaotic and it gets open and it gets just infuriating, I'd probably say is the best way to look at it. I think that leads quite nicely onto my next point, and that is the fact that Conquest Assault in Battlefield 5 simply doesn't do anything. It's not a very well received mode, and that definitely is something that needs some work. And the reason I say that is because Conquest Assault actually used to be really good back in the day. It used to be a really intense game mode that I think a lot of us appreciated, and I think what makes it special is it has that ability to create lots of Battlefield moments very early on in the initial push and the initial fight. And I think the best way to learn Conquest Assault is to look at Gulf of Oman, whether that be the remastered version or the original. But Gulf of Oman was a really great Conquest Assault, and the reason for that was because although the attackers approached from a general direction, there was a fleshed out field. They had the ability to attack and flank in various different locations. It wasn't simply a case of, we're going to run into A or B and we're probably going to get killed. And that's why Hamada suffers so heavily, is because people fixate very much on two objectives, because the map feels quite narrow at the beginning, and because of that it takes one player with the common sense to try and sneak very, very far away to make a difference. But the problem is that, you can't really rely on the average Battlefield player to do things like that. You almost kind of have to show them the way, show them that the map is broader, and they have more options in terms of an assault. In fact, if anything, I would flip the map around. Currently, you attack in the open desert. I would actually flip it around so you're attacking the urban region on Conquest Assault first and allow players to enter that way. I think that would create much more interesting dynamics of gameplay, and it would make it much more easier for some of the assaulting teams to really spread out and get a good grip with what's going on. But just Conquest Assault in general, really, is a mode that could be very successful on Battlefield with the right kind of treatment. Now, we all know redesigns are something that perhaps don't get a lot of attention, and they are something that I wish did. Simply purely down to the fact that there are a lot of elements of the game that can be improved over time without necessarily constraining too much on developers. You know, going in and rearranging a few map assets would be somewhat challenging, but obviously it wouldn't take as long as the 9 to 12 months that the maps originally take to make. Speaking of things that need redesigning, it's time to look a little bit more abstractly, and that is for me, of course, the actual front end of Battlefield 5. Lots of people talking about the menus, and these things are just overly convoluted. You know, there's no reason to have like an armory that's separate from your company, and then your classes are different, and then there's just too many menus. Why do I have to go through like 6 menus to look at one gun that I sort of want to apply to a class, you know? It's overly frustrated. It doesn't need to be that difficult. And I think, you know, even just having a tab for the armory within your company would actually make a lot more sense. So just cutting down the menus in general to a much more simplified and obvious format, that's something I think definitely needs work. Moving along, something that I think is actually a kind of simple option, but also something that would be very enjoyable, is playlist redesigns. You know, I feel like at the moment, Battlefield simply lacking RSP is massively sad, and it's something I've already commented on, and something that I think is really frustrated. But there is, of course, an opportunity here, and that is that we can have custom playlists in the game that will radically change how Battlefield plays, but it could be really fun. Like, say for example, a mode that features like ultra levels of building, like a super fast build mode. Or, you know, something a bit like the old school mode, what was it, Back to Basics in Battlefield 1, where you had only bolt action rifles. You know, it's most like these were quite enjoyable, and it was one of the reasons I played Battlefield 1 for as long as I did, was because some of the playlists were actually quite fun, and although I didn't really enjoy the game, it certainly adds another layer. It's something to enjoy, it's something to bite into, and I think, you know, modes like that are really important. They're modes that could somewhat fill the void for the lack of RSP, and really if I'm going to go for a huge redesign or a huge addition, shall we say, this is a bit of a sneaky one to throw in this video. For the love of God, I would love Scavenger. Scavenger in Battlefield 5 would be an immense game mode, and I really do hope it sneaks its way somewhere into Battlefield 5. Another thing that I think is worth talking about is the redesigning of some of the extreme weather conditions in Battlefield 5, because I feel like they really contribute to the game. Now, I know the Gulf of Oman sandstorm wasn't exactly the most popular thing in the world, but it actually works really well on Hamada and really well on FL652, especially on modes like Breakthrough, because it adds another layer. It's a whole new layer of cover and concealment that people don't really think about. And I think the reason people didn't enjoy the things like the sandstorms back in the day was purely because, you know, you'd just be a big red Dorito in a sea of things that people could clearly see. There is no spotting now, and naturally this is an opportunity for DICE. And that kind of layer of extreme weather, I mean, I only found out that there was a sandstorm on Hamada today. You know, this was news to me. I didn't know this thing existed, and I've been playing the game since launch, and it's the first time it's ever appealed to me. And I really think that it made Breakthrough on Hamada really interesting, and I'd like to see more of it. And I'd like to see it on some other maps as well. Some of the lightning storms and, you know, rain on things like Devastation and Rotterdam can actually add a really good tactical layer to the game that I don't think we simply see enough of. And some of them are already assets that are in the game that could be very simple to switch on. Some of them could be added to maps like Arras, for example, which doesn't exactly feature any weather conditions, but would be really cool if it did. I think that's one of the most popular maps in the game right now, and having something added to it like that could be something that tickles a lot of people's fancy. I'd say the final thing that really does need some redesigning, and this is of course a little bit bigger, is purely the fact that there needs to be a redesign of cosmetics and visuals, and what exactly the aim is with this system. You know, with official currency coming into the game, it's something that does need focusing on, because at the end of the day, why the hell would I buy something if I don't find it interesting? Like, sure, you can give me a really interesting skin or something, but ultimately this is a first-person shooter. Those are the kinds of things I'm not really gonna see. Like, we need things like best squad animations, we need things like gun inspection animations, reload animations, maybe even voice lines, the kind of things that are actually visually and audibly noticeable in Battlefield 5, you know, like, these aren't things that you can, you know, slap on. This isn't a third-person game, and because of that, there really needs to be a rethought as to what's going on with it. And in my opinion, no offense to them, some of the Tides of War character customizations have been pretty great, but the weapon ones have been kind of weak. I haven't really enjoyed them, and none of them have particularly stood out to me as things I'd really want. So, that's about it for my redesign video today, troops. What is it that you want to see get touched up or changed in Battlefield 5? Let me know in the comment section down below, and as always, folks, thank you for watching.